There's this emotion which humans are capable of experiencing called meaning. It happens when you look up at the stars at night, or hold your child's hand for the first time, or accomplish something great, or, I don't know, go to a Radiohead concert.
I think the closest I've ever come to God was at a Radiohead concert.
And most are in agreement that a life organized around these experiences over, say, money or dopamine is seen as being so worth attaining that all of culture should be organized around delivering it. Now, some may claim that the cause of these experiences are just chemicals in the brain.
What people call love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed.
But this explanation fails to capture the ravenous transcendence of meaning, and so it makes a lot of sense that when trying to work out where these feelings come from, humans all across the world from every culture unanimously came up with the same theory, that there must be some kind of higher power at play. The traditional religious way to understand concepts like meaning, morality, or beauty is to state that they are real objects in the universe, and are therefore objective. Like, when we say meaning, there is a real thing out there that we're referring to. Therefore, our feelings of meaning and beauty can be interpreted as a kind of perception. The same way that our eyes subjectively experience the atoms that objectively exist around us, our moral compasses subjectively experience the nature of God which surrounds us. And so if meaning is by definition perceiving God, it logically follows that if you were to attempt to perceive meaning or beauty without God, or believe that it was, say, moral to kill people, these feelings could be interpreted as a kind of moral hallucination. And of course, if God is our source of meaning, then it logically follows that if God were to disappear, then meaning would disappear too. And so the claim that I can have meaning without God because I can still feel it would be like saying I can still have a platform without atoms because I can hallucinate it being there. It just doesn't work that way. This fact, however, became a bit of an issue when in the 1800s some people started to work something out that God isn't actually real, leading us to the following syllogism. Premise 1, God is humanity's source of meaning. Premise 2, humans no longer believe in God. Conclusion, therefore we're fucked. This is the opinion of most religious people who claim that humans are fundamentally lost without their creator.
In the absence of God, there really is no objective meaning and purpose to human existence or to the universe. The petty projects and purposes that we invent for our lives are really just subjective illusions.
Turn down for what?
And in response to this problem, two distinct defenses have emerged: existentialism and absurdism. Existentialism's response is to deny the first premise, claiming that, actually, meaning is something that individuals can construct on their own. Sure, they admit that the death of God may have been a great tragedy, sinking us into the valley of nihilism, but if we zoom out, we can see that this valley is just the journey we have to go through to reach our ultimate destination. You can think of Nietzsche's philosophy as kind of like rehabilitation. Man was born with a broken leg and has been leaning on God as a crutch to deal with this fact, but it's not until we have the courage to put this crutch aside that we can begin building back strength in our leg and truly rise higher, reaching our full potential. Meanwhile, absurdism takes the opposite approach. Absurdism disagrees with, none of these premises. Absurdists state that, yeah, life sucks. Our existence is always going to make no sense, and we should just acknowledge this fact and learn to accept it. Absurdism is mostly associated with Albert Camus, who compares humanity's plight to that of Sisyphus, doomed to carry out meaningless tasks with no hope of reaching something higher. But despite this fact, he states that one must imagine Sisyphus happy because of this reason. Sisyphus has the ability to acknowledge and admit the absurd nature of his position. Had he done the opposite and desperately searched for something that doesn't exist, then of course, he'd drive himself miserable by setting out looking for something that he'd never find. And so the way forward is to simply stop wanting meaning, and off the bat, that seems like a reasonable viewpoint. After all, many of the wisest philosophers throughout history have been telling us that desire is the root of all suffering. Whether that be Taoism, Buddhism, Stoicism, or the Jedi Code, letting go of being attached to what we can't control is universally seen as being a good idea. And so if it really is the case that meaning isn't real, then of course, cutting our reliance on it is logical. And according to my channel analytics, most of you guys agree. Absurdism is constantly brought up as a solution in my comments whenever I talk about the meaning crisis, but I'm sad to report that I disagree. I think that this retreat from meaning represents a kind of immaturity in our understanding of what the word real even means. It's at best surrendering a battle we've never lost, and is at worst actively prohibiting our ability to build something better. And so to understand why I think this, we're going to have to unravel exactly what we mean when we say that something is real. Part 2. What is real? Science and emergence. So I'd like you to imagine that you're a physicist in ancient Greece, and you're tasked with solving the problem of how living things are able to move. And remember, you don't have access to microscopes to learn about cells or anything like that. You have to come up with a theory solely based on what's immediately observable. We'd want to start by examining movement in general. Lots of things move. Rocks move when they fall, fire moves when it rises, and so we might assume that all objects have an inherent direction embedded in their ontology, causing them to go in a certain direction. This is what Aristotle believed. Rocks fall because they have an inherent towards earthness. Fire rises because it has an inherent towards skyness. But humans clearly have something more than that. We can move in any direction we want, changing our minds on the fly, and so there must be something more than just an embedded direction. We must have something like a soul or pneuma, an energy within us with the power to decide that grants us the energy to move freely. This is exactly the theory that not just Aristotle, but many human cultures came to. The mystery of human movement is a single unique phenomena, and so there must be a single unique answer, and souls fit the bill, right? Now, as a theory for its day, this is not a bad attempt at explaining the reality of life and death, as it accounts for everything we see and allows us to understand the world. But of course, it's also wrong. Over time, we discovered processes like digestion and respiration that gave the body usable energy. We understood the role of brains in determining goals, and understood how the contraction of muscles could get us towards said goals. As it turns out, the impossible to explain phenomena of human movement was not caused by some equally impossible to explain force. Instead, and this is key, it was just caused by a combination of a bunch of easier to explain smaller forces that, when grouped together, emerged into something larger. Now, I'm going to be using the word emergent a lot in this video, so let's define it real quick. An emergent property of a complex system is one that does not belong to any part of that system on its own, but that happens as a result of parts of that system interacting. So like, biology emerges out of chemistry. You cannot go and touch a biology. A biology doesn't exist. Instead, what we call biology is just the combination of how individual chemical processes work together. The reason I bring up souls is because I think it pretty neatly maps onto what absurdists think is happening with meaning. In both cases, humanity had a difficult to explain single phenomena, life or these powerful feelings. We theorized that therefore some fantastical single object must be causing it, like souls or meaning. But as science evolved, we understood that these things are just the emergent property of chemicals in our bodies or chemicals in our brains.
It's just a chemical reaction.
And so if it's safe to say that souls aren't real, it must therefore be safe to say that meaning isn't real. Right? Well, to tease this apart, what we're relying on here is a hidden premise. Meaning is emergent. If something is emergent, that means it's not real, therefore meaning isn't real. However, as I seek to prove, there are a bunch of scenarios in which this second premise just doesn't hold. Just like life or emotion, gravity has always been a mystery that humans wish to solve. In 1687, Isaac Newton proposed his theory of gravity, that it was a universal force of attraction, or in other words, that gravity was a single object. Then, in 1915, Einstein revised this theory with his idea of general relativity. Einstein proposed that all objects exist within space-time, and that mass bends space-time around it. And given that objects always take the shortest path to their destination, and that the diagonal of a square is always shorter than the sum of its two sides, this means that objects travel towards any center of mass. And that, dear viewer, is why objects fall. Isn't physics fun? But by now, you've probably spotted it. Gravity was theorized to be a single force, but then it was proven to actually just be an emergent property of other forces. Now, if we were to follow this second premise, which absurdism relies on, then we'd have to say that gravity isn't real. But this just isn't how anyone talks. If you go up to a physics professor and claim that Einstein's theories debunked gravity, then they'd look at you funny. Einstein didn't debunk gravity, he just changed our understanding of what it was, denying the second premise. But they would agree that modern biology disproved souls, so how come this principle is only sometimes applying? What the fuck is going on here? In the former case, once a sophisticated understanding of life was reached, it was said to debunk or replace souls. But in our second example, newer theories were not seen as the replacement of gravity, but the fulfillment of it. Observe the difference in language here. We used to believe in souls, but it turns out that what's actually there is just our bodies evolving the ability to move around energy in a certain way. Versus, we used to believe that gravity was a novel force, but it turns out that what it actually is just the effects of space-time bending around matter. Metaphysically, gravity was and still is the thing that causes moons to orbit planets, whatever that is. We just defined our understanding of what gravity is. Meanwhile, souls were viewed to no longer be the thing that moved bodies because we found something else to fit that role. So why are these treated differently? What explains this discrepancy is the way we choose to either stipulate or describe phenomena. To stipulate means to make something true by definition. So like, if I define the word murder as the immoral killing of a human, then I can say murder is always wrong. Not because I've proven it, but just because that's true by the definition I've given. Meanwhile, to describe is to prove something by making statements about the world. So for example, killing is wrong because it harms people. So going back to gravity, the moon's orbit was stipulated as gravity. That is to say, we agreed that whatever is causing this motion, gravity is what we'll call it. Then gravity was described as a single force, only for us to change our mind and instead begin describing it as an emergent phenomena. Meanwhile, with souls, it's the opposite way round. Locomotion in the body was described as being caused by souls, and souls were stipulated as being a single force. Which means that when our theories changed, the word soul couldn't mean anything other than what we were using it for, and so the word soul had to go. And so this begs the question, which way round is meaning? Is meaning stipulated as the feeling we get, which some people describe as being from God and others describe as coming from within? Or is meaning stipulated as the thing that God gives us? If it's this way round, then existentialism is true, because meaning could be redescribed as something we choose. But if it's this way round, then absurdism has to be true, because given God doesn't exist, this kind of meaning simply isn't real, and we should live our lives to stop wanting it. So which one of these is true? Well, to be honest, there is no answer to that question. This understanding of where descriptions versus stipulations lie is not some logical genealogy that was decided before. It's instead an intuitive understanding that we are coming up with after the fact. And if we wanted to, we could choose to change these round any way we like. This means that, if you think about it, the difference between existentialism and absurdism is semantic. Because when it comes to the sheer fact, both philosophies agree on everything. Both philosophies are forms of objective nihilism. They don't believe in any kind of objective meaning. But neither philosophy are formally pessimistic, as they both still believe that there is something which makes life worth living anyway. The only thing they disagree on is whether or not to call what these lives have meaning. Wait a minute, so if it's all semantic, then who cares what label we use? Why is this video called Absurdism Sucks and not Absurdism is intellectually indistinct from its competitors? Well, because A, that would make for a shit title. But B, because semantics matter, man. Imagine if your partner was to say to you, "I love you despite your flaws," versus, "I don't consider you perfect, but my emotional state allows me to ignore this fact." These two sentences semantically convey identical informational content, but the latter would obviously make you feel like shit. But also consider that this goes a lot deeper than mere personal opinion. If we are trying to build a movement to gather people together to solve the meaning crisis, united under a single banner, then these small differences in wording can explode into massive schisms. Language matters, and I think that the language of absurdism is fundamentally incapable of building a life philosophy or movement that will actually work. And what's better, I think I can prove it. Part 3. Why absurdism sucks. When discussing if meaning isn't real, it might be relevant to ask an adjacent question. Is anything real? Like, surely as a baseline, we can establish that, say, this bed I'm sitting on is real, right? Well, no, motherfucker, this bed is not some standalone item within the laws of physics. Scientists do not acknowledge the existence of quarks, space-time, and Xander's bed as the 3 constants of the universe. Instead, what we refer to as this bed is nothing more than a collection of billions of atoms arranged in a pattern that causes us to call it a bed. This bed does not exist, except in its sense as an emergent phenomena of the atoms comprising it. This viewpoint, by the way, is called metaphysical nihilism. Metaphysical nihilism is to objects what meaning nihilism is to meaning, and therefore can be used as a helpful point of comparison. Now, metaphysical nihilism is deeply annoying as a philosophy, because it is simultaneously A, undeniably true, and B, deeply unintuitive. You are a smart human in the 21st century. The ontology of the universe as a combination of atomic building blocks rather than as a series of discrete objects is easy for you to wrap your head around. And yet, this philosophy is nigh impossible to live by. Looking at a bed and telling yourself it's not real feels like an active effort you have to maintain, because your brain's instincts are screaming at you that it is real. And so, why is that? How can we know something to be true while feeling as if it's false? Well, cast your mind back to the first ever animal to develop sight. When sight first evolved in our ancestors' brains, they didn't have the time or intelligence to understand the true nature of reality. Every calorie used up by the brain is a calorie that could have been used running away from predators. And so unless a piece of understanding was absolutely necessary to survival, it couldn't be justified. You have two options. A, evolve vision down to the level of the atom, then view objects as pure information, which you then analyze to learn things about the properties of what's in front of you before working out if there's any way to use this fact to your advantage. Or B, you could just evolve the illusion of objects for the same price. And given that these two tasks would ultimately be equally effective at getting the job done of giving us perception, evolution is picking B every time. You can think of this process as viewing objects in the world rather than the atoms comprising it as kind of like being compressed files on a computer. You take the infinite complexity of the universe, which gets folded down into a series of objects for you to perceive. In psychology, the process of this compression is known as gestalt. And so because of this gestalt, which we evolved for expediency, metaphysical nihilism is impossible to embody as an ideology day to day. Now, here's where things get interesting, because consider that this principle equally applies to abstract concepts, like, say, duties. I believe that I have a duty to go to the gym. Why do I believe this? Well, I want to be happy and I want to be an asset to the people around me, which means that I need good physical and mental health, and I would like to attract a partner one day, and challenging myself is practice for striving towards my goals, and so the gym, given its dozens of proven benefits to all of these goals, seems like a high return on investment. This paragraph I just read is the reason I go to the gym. And sometimes when I'm at the gym and things are feeling particularly difficult that day, I need to remind myself of this reason. So when the weights are feeling difficult and I need to give myself a pep talk, do I say this paragraph to myself? No, of course not. This paragraph is clunky and unpoetic. The reality of the gym's usefulness being an emergent property of my desires mixed with societal pressures is too big of an idea to be immediately emotionally moving to me. So instead, I say to myself some other bullshit. I say, you're a man, your duty is to be strong, your bloodline is depending on you to perform.
Life as a man is hard, but hard times create strong men. Nobody loves me. I don't even like myself.
But look what I've done here. I have essentially gestalted my own value system. This made-up concept of a man's duty is created as a faster way of computing the complex relationship between my actions and the society I live in the same way that the made-up concept of a bed is a faster way of computing the utility of this billion group of atoms. I do not actually believe that my chromosomes carry some normative property that I should live my life by. Basic logic shows that masculinity isn't real for the same reason that beds aren't. And yet, because of this principle we've established, humans are more motivated to do good when there's some ghostly force like masculinity which we imagine is pushing us to do so, rather than, say, because there is some argument that proves it's a good idea. I think that we can take what we've learned here and spearhead it into a usable psychological principle. A gestalted illusion of a whole is almost always more valent than an accurate description of its underlying contents. A picture of a meal will always be more enticing than a chemical description of its contents. A silhouette of a body will always be more titillating than a description of impregnation. And with this in mind, we can finally explore why I don't think absurdism works. Existentialists want to create a new gestalted category for us to aim towards, subjective meaning. And this concept of subjective meaning might be filled with community and achievement and purpose and self-improvement. And absurdists would agree that all of these things are good and would advocate for organizing your life around them, but they wouldn't let you call it meaning, which flies in the face of this principle that we found.
Do you need some grand meaning, or do you just need to live a life that's embedded in meaningful activities? Does meaning just come about day to day from being like, I care about my family, I'm invested in my work?
But that is the meaning crisis. Those are gone.
Saying that we're not allowed to call this thing which we are organizing our lives around meaning because it's not metaphysically real would be like saying that restaurants have to write out the chemical contents of their food instead of naming their desserts because desserts aren't metaphysically real. Wouldn't that be ridiculous? Food is an emergent phenomena of chemicals, and recognizing said emergent phenomena is what our appetite is organized around. And in the same way, meaning is an emergent phenomena of community and virtue and faith, and recognizing that emergent phenomena is what our motivation towards them is organized around. Could you imagine if we started applying this principle universally, that we should avoid lives filled with morality because morality isn't real? It's just an emergent property of our desire to do good, after all. One must imagine Sauron happy. And fuck it, let's go even further. Fitness isn't real either. That's an emergent property of our bodies. Should we avoid lives where we try to be fit because that's metaphysically not real? One must imagine Peter Griffin happy. Meaning, in an emergent sense, is real. At least as real as food or fitness or morality. And when humans have these things, we're happy. So shouldn't we strive towards them with a philosophy that empowers us with language to describe them? The human mind views the world as a series of emergent objects, and so to expect us to stop doing so is completely unreasonable. Now, some of you may be claiming that, well, I find absurdism very easy to follow. I am able to fill my life with things that make me happy without at any point needing to call these things meaning. And yeah, that's valid. At the end of the day, every brain is different, and some people will find some philosophies more compelling than others. No one can take your subjective experience away from you. However, there is one last silver bullet I have in the chamber. Something that's always bothered me about the quote, "one must imagine Sisyphus happy," is that, well, Sisyphus doesn't have any friends. Homies are scientifically proven to be one of the highest predictors of human happiness. And yet Sisyphus is expected to be happy without them? Bear in mind, this is the platonic success story of absurdism. The case study in which our hero is able to prevail despite the odds being stacked against him, with absurdism as his weapon. But without friendship, I fundamentally just don't buy it. And this monumental oversight becomes a problem when you realize that absurdism is chronically bad at facilitating friendship. Humans require community as a base structure to find friends within. I did a whole video breaking this down. When you meet a person in the wild, you may or may not have anything in common with them, but when meeting people from within a community, they come pre-vetted from those around you. They have values in common with you and are willing to participate in the rituals that you also hold dear. Making friends within a tight community like a church is the easiest shit I ever did. You just walk in and connection occurs. It's like magic, because while individuals may be able to live lives without meaning, communities aren't. And good luck forming a community without any form of meaning holding it together.
No tradition for me, thank you very much. You know, I've got it all right in my head.
Because communities need to be united by something. A study was performed on a series of communes that found that being religious, particularly a religion that requires costly sacrifice from its members, was massively predictive of that commune's success. And just empirically, absurdism doesn't have any examples of functional communities under its belt. So that's it. I've made my argument. Absurdism is fundamentally incompatible with the way that the human brain perceives the world. And even if some individuals are able to fuck with it, it is not a proper foundation for any community to be organized around. Which means that the video's over and there's nothing left to talk about. Absurdism has no redeeming qualities, right? Right? So remember when 2 minutes ago I argued that concepts like masculinity as memes are compressed ways of perceiving real phenomena, and that asking us to throw away said compressed ideas would be tantamount to ditching said real phenomena? Yeah, good times. Well, here's the problem with compressed files that I didn't mention before. Sometimes They have artifacts. Artifacts are those random lines between colours that appear on compressed images. They're the pixelated edges and random dots that appear from nowhere, because no conversion process can ever be 100% efficient, and so when trying to convert the raw world into a format that our computers can understand, details get added or removed. And so in the same way that image compression can create pixels that aren't really there, ideological compression can create normativities that aren't really there. Masculinity, I argued, is a compressed way of interpreting every challenge, responsibility, and belief that men have to navigate through in order to exist. And when it comes to gym motivation, that's a very helpful ideological ally to have, but when I said that, I imagine that many of you would have held up a mental red flag, because by engaging with the idea that men ought to go to the gym because they are men, I am forced to, as a byproduct of this belief, implicitly accept that women perhaps have a different set of oughts. And that ethics is in some way gendered, a belief that has led others to subjugate people because of their gender. But here's the thing, I don't believe this. I believe that individuals should have the ability to do whatever they like, with gender not being a factor. Therefore, this implicit aspect of ideology, the idea that ethics is gendered, is not a true representation of my beliefs, but an artifact, a phantom speck that appears in my belief system in the same way and for the same reason that phantom specks appear in compressed photos. And that sounds bad, right? Am I saying that in the process of being human, our desire to process the world in simpler forms may end up causing us to accidentally adopt implicit beliefs that contradict our own values? Well, yeah, I kinda am. And so there are two big problems that this question raises. Number one, if the concept of meaning is, as I have argued, a compressed way of comprehending the emergent phenomena of our deeper needs for community and purpose, then does said belief in meaning contain any compression artifacts that we should be worried about? And two, if the answer to this question happens to be yes, what course of action should we take to avoid these artifacts? Would it be worth ditching any ideology that contains them and thus necessarily embrace absurdism? Well, let's explore. In his 1946 book, Politics and the English Language, George Orwell attempted to articulate why the English language feels like it's getting worse, a question that is still relevant to this day. One of the chief causes of this degradation that George Orwell discusses is a process that he calls dead metaphors. Take a common phrase like, "we stand shoulder to shoulder," and consider just how much genuine unity and beauty is communicated in such a simple phrase. Really try to picture what it would be like to be so aligned with those around you that you stand with your shoulders physically touching, uniting your bodies till you create a wall with camaraderie and mutual commitment to a cause acting as its cement. It's a surprisingly poetic phrase, but let's be honest. When you hear someone say, standing shoulder to shoulder in day-to-day speech, does any of this imagery actually reach you? Do you genuinely find yourself, mindfully picturing the scene to make sure that it holds its meaning? No. That'd be dumb. You probably don't. I'm guessing that the last time you heard somebody say this phrase, you didn't even notice, with your brain automatically translating the phrase into its functional meaning without ever stopping to engage with its metaphor intrinsically. And what Orwell argues is that this is kinda sad, right? Hearing a phrase for the first time is kinda like walking through your Minecraft world for the first time. Every hill and tree is new to you, and you are forced to think deeply about how exactly you're going to get around. Because art requires not just quality on the art side, but active engagement on the viewer's side. And when you see something for the first time, you are forced to put the pieces together. Your brain lights up like a stage lamp, seeing every possibility and making the world more evocative. But contrast this to the 100th time you walk through your Minecraft world. By now you've probably built a road or at least know your way around enough to not have to actively think about the world. You are no longer intrinsically interested in this world to feed your craving for knowledge. You are only extrinsically interested in the world, just enough for it to get you to your destination. And to bring this analogy full circle, phrases work the same way. When you've heard a metaphor enough times, it becomes dead to you, precisely because because you are pre-rendering its meaning like canned laughter, instead of interpreting its symbolism from scratch and letting its meaning wash over you. And when researching this video, I found that there's actually some neurology research backing Orwell up. When your eyes are reading text, instead of saccading individually from word to word, blocks of words are processed together. When you see a group of words like once upon a time, your brain can intuit the meaning of the entire phrase in a single glance, processing it as if it were just one word, which means that on a neurological level, when you see a phrase that you've experienced before, your brain literally stops going through it and just compresses or gestalts it instrumentally to get to the end of the sentence. Or in other words, what George Orwell argues is that the phrase standing shoulder to shoulder is brain rot. And unironically, you can take Orwell's theory and apply them to all of those modern phrases that may once have been funny but now have been overused to the point of absurdity.
They understood the assignment. This lives rent-free in my head. They said the quiet part loud.
And so let's take this idea that Orwell has given us, dead metaphors, and see if we can apply it to any other aspects of society. YouTuber Tantacruel has an amazing video about why the music in Star Wars movies has started to get worse, because the meaning of each of its melodies has become so set in stone that instead of having carefully planned leitmotifs throughout a film that follow a narrative structure, they're just lazily thrown whenever the relevant image is on screen, now unable to act as anything more than a musical please clap sign.
Look!
Please clap.
Or to borrow Orwell's language here, instead of a dead metaphor, we might call this a dead leitmotif. In Marxist philosophy, there is an idea called reification, and while it's used in a variety of ways, one of its uses is to talk about how value used to come directly from your work, but now we've abstracted a layer, defining value as money, the thing we get from our labor, and in the process have organized our value system around cynical abstract numbers. Instead of interpreting our labor as a resource we have within us and having meaningful conversations about how we might want to spend it, we now care about nothing more than abstract numbers. Our eyes now skip over this to do nothing more than extrinsically care about how we're going to get to our next paycheck. And so what these three examples show is that when we've seen something enough times and compress it down in our heads for easier understanding and transmission, we often lose the real passion in the underlying idea. If in Orwell's words we can have dead metaphors and maybe even dead leitmotifs or dead value, then that implies that compression can kill everything we love. And so under existentialism, the philosophy that reifies meaning into a word we can talk about, could we have dead meaning? Well, certainly several philosophers have argued this before. There's this idea in the Zen philosophy tradition that the hand that points to the moon is not the moon itself, and so the word that points us to that which matters, meaning, is not the same thing as the actual phenomena of meaning. And so if we ever forget this fact by fetishizing our frameworks, we risk falling into a simulacra that separates us from whatever the original goal might have been. We might risk having started out trying to codify meaning into a specific word so that we can talk about it more, but in the process prevent ourselves from ever having meaningful conversations about meaning because we are now too obsessed with our own language that we've lost track of the original underlying idea. And there is certainly a degree to which a journey to live a more meaningful life can start off helpful but quickly devolve into thinking about the hypothetical idea of meaning so hard that you stop engaging with the underlying life organization that actually allows you to feel it.
What do you want to do? But I ask you a very simple question, and you can't give me a straight answer.
And so, if believing in concrete meaning can lead you to fetishize it to a degree so much that you lose touch with what actually matters, or even make you torture yourself by desiring something that you can by definition never have, then absurdism actually sounds pretty attractive. If meaning can do this much to alienate us from our lives, then the solution might be to just let go. And that's the best case that I can make for absurdism. And so to recap, in the first section, I argued that absurdism and existentialism are only semantically different, believing the same facts about the world but coding them in a different metaphysics. In the second section, I argued that absurdism is impossible to organize around and that humans need grand concrete ideas to motivate and guide our lives. In the third section, I argued that existentialism risks ruining our lives, killing the joy in every phenomena it's supposed to help us understand. And so if both views have their strengths and their weaknesses, which one do we pick? Well, if Aristotle is to be believed, then the most virtuous choice is always found within the golden mean between two extremes. And so, if I think that absurdism and existentialism both have their pros and cons, then surely there's a way that we can combine them together to form a more nuanced third option. You can think of absurdism and existentialism like fear and courage. Someone who only ever experiences pure fear or pure courage is likely to ruin their life by either never going outside or risking too much. And so our brains require the ability to contextually experience both when the situation calls for them. And so does this mean that I'm coming round to absurdism? Do I think that it's good after all? Was the title of this video clickbait? Well, no. Just because fear and courage are both needed doesn't mean they're both equal. The way I see it, if you lived a life with 90% courage and 10% fear, you'd have the freedom to do whatever you wanted, boldly pursuing your dreams with that 10% acting as a regulator on your courage, making sure that you don't go too far over the edge. Meanwhile, if you lived a life of 90% fear and 10% courage, you'd stay inside all day with the occasional chance to stick your neck out. Courage is an appropriate base to live your life on that occasionally sends you down the wrong road. Meanwhile, fear is a terrible base to live your life off that occasionally saves your skin. And I think that precisely this is the appropriate way to view existentialism and absurdism. I stand by everything I said in the first half of this video. As a primary ideology to follow, a baseline to live the 90% of your life by, absurdism does suck for all the reasons I mentioned. It isn't compatible with community's need for strong motivation, and its need for pedantic realism isn't scalable. Meanwhile, existentialism can motivate you towards kindness, community, and transcendence by saying yes to meaning. Existentialism does have these problems with reifications I mentioned. You can fuck yourself over by obsessing over grand narratives. And so in those cases, I do think that selectively applying absurdism as a regulator on existentialism is valid, especially if you're following it through the more well thought out practices of absurdism found in Buddhism, designed to actually help you rather than just intellectually toying with the abstract. But ultimately, I think that's as far as absurdism should go. It's a good regulator for a life that otherwise contains meaning, but not a replacement for it. When it comes to solving the meaning crisis, the very thing that this YouTube channel is dedicated to, the best way to live a life is to embrace meaning at every turn, to understand that there is no objective meaning, and yet to strive for meaning anyway, because you know deep down that it can be found anywhere by those willing to look. And that if you stand shoulder to shoulder with those who believe in the same mission as you, you might just construct something better than any of you could have made on your own. And in the end, I think that's the most powerful way to think about meaning. Meaning is something we search for with open arms when building community, while occasionally allowing absurdism to clean the bathwater so that the baby can continue doing so safely.